On this 4th of July weekend, we talk politics and pot with the former state senator and the head of the state Office of Cannabis Management. The Point starts right now. Former state senator Daniel Squadron has written a book suggesting that state legislatures should be another branch of the federal government. But one of his most tantalizing arguments has to do with urging people to back inspiring young candidates who can throw the old guys out. Did he have a crystal ball or something? So I'd like to read you proof that I actually read your book, something on page 189, where you say, if you want to support an inspiring candidate, I recommend a 28-year-old against a 30-year incumbent in a Democratic primary in the safe district. Seriously? You predicted this months ago?
Well, I wish I could claim I was some great seer. I was really talking about my own first race, which was in 2008 against a 30-year incumbent when I was
remember that.
28 years old. And the point I'm making there is actually one that I think we forget too much, especially in this moment, which is what's happening in primaries is important in terms of where the party's at, and certainly 75 to 80% of politicians are elected that way. But it's very different than the question of which party, which ideological movement is in control in the country. That 25 to 30% or 20 to 25% of districts is a very different kind of thing. Primaries and general elections are apples and oranges, or even apples and carburetors.
I guess my question is this. You were able to take out a 30-year incumbent. That showed a certain level of voter dissatisfaction in what was going on in your district, which at that time was like lower Manhattan and Brooklyn around the water. But I wonder what your take is on what we saw in the election on the primary on June 23rd, when sort of the same thing happened, where young, inspiring, to use your word, inspiring candidates were able to defeat 2 sitting congressmen and to replace a congresswoman who was retiring who had picked somebody else. So is it the same thing, tapping into dissatisfaction about what's going on in the country or the district?
It was actually pretty rare back in 2008, certainly on the Albany side, but that's changed. You know, it's not actually a new story that the most progressive or most populist candidate is winning the primaries in New York. I'm old enough to remember an election that I didn't win citywide in 2013, but Bill de Blasio, the progressive populist in that race, winning. And so, you know, it's been quite a while where being more populist and more progressive in New York City primary elections is a good strategy. The fact that incumbency means less than it used to, I think, speaks to how much easier it is to build movements and moments from scratch. But it's not really a new thing.
But do you think it has to do with social media and the ability to reach a lot of people in a fairly inexpensive way by just posting?
I think that helps. It's a way to get from zero to something in a way that really was very, very hard before. I mean, I remember the slog of trying to get known with mornings and afternoons and doors and phone calls. That can happen if you take off on social media and if you're part of a movement, like many of these candidates were, that is lifted by a very popular and easy to and well-communicating mayor.
See, I do want to talk about you, but I also want to get your take on, you know, why this happened, and is it something, when you talk about a progressive in a primary, is it something where people in a primary go more to the left, and then in the general election they go more to the right? And will there be the Republicans be able to capitalize on what happened in this past election in order to make some points in the midterms coming November?
Look, there's no question that primaries in both parties, and we've seen this through the spring in the Republican Party too, are creating outcomes that in many general elections could lead to a boogeyman creation by the other party. But that's also always true. I think the mistake is when those of us who are looking at what's happening in this country, looking at the danger to competitive elections that I believe our president poses in the country, not confusing the two. I have Sidney Batch, the North Carolina minority leader, in the book, talking about the fact that when you have so much partisan sorting in election districts, you end up with this kind of encouraging to play to the base. That can be helpful. In New York, the base is clearly right now in the driver's seat, but it's also true that we need a broader coalition than just the base if we're going to preserve competitive elections in the country.
So I just have one more question about that. The candidates that Mayor Mamdani backed were in districts where he ran very strong. So his natural base was there. So the question is, was the election results a result of the fact that there was a natural base, a natural group of people who would turn out for his candidates, but is it translatable across the city, or is it just those specific districts that he could do well because there was a big turnout?
Well, I'd say two things. One is it's here in the middle of the summer, and we're already talking about who's won. That's a reminder, these are primaries, which are what decide it in New York. I used to say that if I was dead and in prison, I would still win my general election, re-election in Lower Manhattan and Brooklyn. So this is about primaries. The other thing is, and this is not a popular piece of punditry, which I guess why I had to maybe write the book, but I think campaigns are much more individualized than people think.
Why? I
won in 2008 because I knocked on nearly 10,000 doors, and I made the case that we could and should expect more from state government. And in each of these races, I think that you need to look at what the candidate was doing with the electorate to win. There's no question that the mayor right now has real enthusiasm and popularity in lots of parts of the city. And that translated to candidates who also, as far as I can tell, work their tails off.
But so, door knocking seemed to help Mayor Mamdani and may have helped in this race. But in your book, you argue that it might be better to have somebody who isn't volunteering to knock on doors, but rather volunteering to raise money. So, because you say money is action. So what is it? Is it both? Are we seeing a return to the old-fashioned door knocking, or do you see a larger picture where if somebody wants to be effective, they should get somebody? I mean, you talk about, Donald Trump having Elon Musk, for example, who was a supporter, but also gave him a lot of money. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, who here thinks that Elon Musk's rallies in central Pennsylvania did more to help Donald Trump get elected than a $250,000 check to that cause? I think we all, I said $250 million, I hope. I think we all would agree that the rally wasn't as important as the contributions. That can also apply to individuals. So door knocking by the candidate themselves in races where there's few enough voters that you can meet a critical mass is the single most important thing candidates can do. For state legislative candidates, it's the most important thing they can do personally. But what about volunteers
doing the knocking for you?
Right, so let's look at this. So let's look at the volunteers that propelled the mayor from an assembly member directly into Gracie Mansion.
Were you surprised by that?
I was surprised that it got over the top. But if you actually look at the fundamentals of what happened, he was really successful at getting attention on social media, but also dollars. The mayor was not, by the end of that race, underfunded, at least in terms of the hard side dollars. There were some independent expenditures. You saw that again this spring. The number of ads, for those of us who were watching the Knicks, for the insurgent candidates matched the ads for the incumbents. A lot of those dollars, though, are grassroots dollars that are being pooled by a movement with energy. Do I think the fact that those candidates had money to communicate was more important than rallies that got people fired up? Absolutely no question.
But if you ran again, would you run the same campaign that you ran the first time you ran?
Oh, if I did, I would lose.
Well, seriously?
Yeah.
Why?
Because
it's changed.
It's changed. That campaign was really about building individual relationships with literally thousands of people.
And today what you need is what?
I think you need to be able to build relationships through that smartphone that's in everyone's pocket.
So it's all about media. It's all about social media. It's all about electronic media.
Well, I think the difference with media, though, is that it is more of a two-way conversation. So I think that sort of fundamental truth holds, which is, and we talk about this here, it's why state legislative politics are still so exciting. It's why you're still thinking about them when you certainly have bigger fish to fry. It's why I've written the book on them. Because state legislative politics are that two-way conversation distilled. In some places, like New Hampshire House districts, which are smaller than the New York City Community Board, you can do it without social media. in a district like the New York Senate district, you need both, but it's still the two-way conversation that wins you elections.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it right there for now, but up next, the head of New York's Office of Cannabis Management. John Kagia is the executive director of the State Office of Cannabis Management. And I know that the governor brought you in to write the so-called ship of state here because the sale of cannabis in New York got off to sort of a rough start. So I'd like to ask you first, so what do you think are your biggest challenges as you take over this office and are trying to change things for the better?
Well, thank you for having me, Marcia. We have an incredible foundation that has been laid over the last few years, and I view my tenure, my role as building upon that foundation. While it has been challenging to build the infrastructure of an entirely new market that didn't exist, none of this existed 5 years ago. And so not only have we built the governing agency for this market, we're now at 270-odd employees. We have issued over 2,000 licenses in this market.
But only 600 dispensaries have opened. Why?
Partly because the licensing process takes time. We have to review every application. We've got to make sure that every applicant is authorized and qualified to operate in New York. But I would also say that with nearly 670 dispensaries now operational in New York, the pace at which New York has built its legal market has actually been among the fastest of all of the regulated markets in the country. So we appreciate that this is has taken some time to kind of build the velocity of the market. But I think we're now at a point where our priorities will be stabilization, ensuring that we're resourcing up the agency to work through the next chapter of building this industry, and build on the extraordinary foundation that has been laid. With over $3 billion in sales generated so far and nearly $2.5 billion estimated just for this year alone, I think we have real velocity behind this program, and my priorities will be around increasing our operational efficiency, ensuring that the stakeholders across New York understand what legalization is, what this industry looks like, and critically, the impact that it is having on our communities, and ensuring that New York continues to maintain a leadership position in this industry in the world.
So here's the question. If you have 2,000 licenses and only 600, not only, but 600 dispensaries have opened, can New Yorkers expect to see another 1,400 dispensaries open, or what does that all mean?
Right, so the 2,000 licenses are across our entire supply chain. So we've licensed cultivators, the folks who are growing the cannabis that's being sold here in New York. We've licensed manufacturers. They're the ones who are taking the plants and making the very rich array of products that we see in the market, the beverages, the edibles, the smokable flower that people consume.
Do we have enough product?
We do, but this is one aspect of the market that we're monitoring very closely. We want to ensure that we have enough capacity to serve the very robust demand in the state of New York, but we also want to avoid a critical issue that has undermined the health of other jurisdictions, which is overproduction, where they've licensed way too much production capacity, and that's created real market.
Have we done that in New York now?
No, we haven't. In fact, this is data we're looking at very closely. I think to date we've maintained a really good balance between the amount of production and our retail sell-through, but we are monitoring these levels very closely. We're a very data-driven organization, and this is going to be a critical aspect of our work moving forward, maintaining that calibration between supply and demand.
The reason I asked you about this 600 dispensaries is that I recall that at the height of the illegal market, even in New York City, there were more than 1,000 illegal shops, sometimes 1,500 illegal shops, and so that it appeared that there was a market for more than 600 dispensaries statewide, especially since there were double that number in illegal shops here in New York City. So the question is, do you feel pressure to open up more dispensaries in New York to compete with what still is somewhat of a thriving illegal business?
That's a great question. And I would respond perhaps in two parts. First is that the illegal market doesn't have any governing rules for how, where these stores can open. And this is part of the reason why it's been such a challenging enforcement initiative, because, you padlock a store on one block and they'll move right next door. But the legal market has real restraints on where legal dispensaries can open. So the first big issue... It
can't be in your schools, it can't be...
Exactly. But critically, half of the state landmass, when the law was first passed, municipalities were given the option to opt out of cannabis retail. And half the landmass of New York, 48% of the jurisdictions in New York, opted out. So the 670 stores that we now have licensed are only in half of the state's geographic footprint. And then you add on top of that the rules around distance requirements from individual dispensaries. In New York City, they have to be at least 1,000 feet apart. You add the distances from schools and houses of worship. And you also add additional market-based factors like the fact that if a landlord has a federal loan, because adult use cannabis remains illegal under federal law, they wouldn't be able to lend or lease a property to a cannabis business. So there end up being all of these additional diminishing factors that limit the types and numbers of properties that are available for cannabis retail. And maybe a final point. I don't think it is necessary to have a dispensary on every single corner in the state to serve the total addressable demand. We think that for the proliferation of illicit dispensaries we saw in the state, there were actually quite a few of them who weren't making any money because of the competitive intensity. So our goal is, one, to ensure that we licensed dispensaries within the rules that, as they're currently written, maintaining those distance rules. Two, that we engage the municipalities that have opted out of legal cannabis to help them understand the value proposition of legal cannabis. My view has always been that opting out of legal cannabis doesn't opt you out of cannabis, it just opts you out of a legal mechanism, a legal place where your consumers and constituents can get it.
In a perfect world, how many dispensaries would you like to see statewide what's full capacity in terms of what you want to see?
So I think the market is going to direct that. We're not going to place a hard cap on what maximal capacity will look like. And I think the rules, particularly the distancing requirements, will serve as a natural limiter of how many places, how many locations can open. But we do still think that there's significant overhead opportunity to license more capacity. And I suspect at the rate that we are going, I would expect that we will be at over 800 stores comfortably by the end of this year.
How many localities have said no to legal cannabis?
I don't have the exact number, but it ends up accounting for about half of the state's geographic footprint.
Half of the state?
Half of the state has opted out of retail cannabis.
And they don't want it because they don't like cannabis, or because they prefer the illegal market? I mean, what's going on?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I don't believe any community has a preference for the illegal market. But I can understand the initial kind of reservations that many communities had about allowing legal cannabis in their communities, having these dispensaries on Main Street. I think we have seen on the legal market that the sky has not fallen. Many of the concerns that municipalities had when they chose to opt out have been unfounded. And in fact, I've been very heartened to see that we are starting to see municipalities choosing to opt in, or at least beginning to have those conversations, because they realize the tax opportunity that
we're going to have to leave it right there for now, but our conversations continue right after the show on our streaming channel, CBS News New York. Thank you for joining me. On the celebration of the 250th birthday of our nation, the big question is, what does America mean to New Yorkers? They're weighing in on your point. I just wonder what America means to you.
America means to me like inclusivity, diversity.
Freedom. Freedom, happiness, and opportunity.
Means a lot. It means freedom of movement.
A place where you can express yourself artistically and in many ways.
I'm really unsure. It used to be democracy, but right now it's empire.
Oh, America. God bless America. I'm from the Caribbean, so migrating to America was a blessing for me.
I'm an immigrant to this country, so sometimes immigrants come and they appreciate America and the beauty of it much more than if you had it growing up.
As well as born, raised, everything is right here in America for me. It's my life. So I used to romanticize America. So I used to watch like Band of Brothers and Saving Private Ryan. I used to think that America stood for such amazing things and that this was such a special country. And then a couple years ago, I started really thinking about it, and I realized I don't know if America really stood for those things to begin with. So I don't know what America is anymore.
What does America mean to you?
Whew. What does it mean now, or what is it supposed to mean?
What does it mean to you now?
Right now, I'm extremely disappointed of the state of our country. Right now, just with the administration the way it is, I feel like America stands for isolation and inequality and white supremacy, personally.
Okay.
I wish it stood for more.
So why do you think so many people want to come here?
I think opportunity. In one word, opportunity.
People still have that vision that America is a place where you can, you know, get the American dream.
We want a chunk out of the apple. We want that opportunity to live a comfortable life, to be financially stable. And that's what coming to America is supposed to be.
It's a beautiful place. Who doesn't want to come here?
Generally speaking, do I think it's a better country than most? Yeah, but I don't think it's, you know, some bright light, you know, out on the horizon anymore.
I mean, despite everything, we do still have a lot of opportunity.
If you could live anywhere in the whole world, would you still live in the United States?
Hell yeah. You can't take me away from here. Hell yes.
It's my home. I come from here, yeah.
Of course, yes.
Why?
It's the best. I'm biased, but it's the best.
I would not.
No.
Where would you live?
Right now? Canada, the UK.
Oh no, I'm living in America. I'm living, yeah. New York is me.
Even though we have disagreements with whether it's political or religion, I still believe in, you know, the core of Americans.
This is the place that gave my family opportunity, and I feel very proud of that, very grateful for that, and I feel like we should really appreciate it. And being an American is something that should unite us.